Hello, hello. This is your host, Noemi, the cackling crone and her cauldron of wisdom. And of course, I'm excited because it's Tuesday and I have a great topic I want to dig into with you. So first, I want to welcome you to Season 1, Episode 2, The Ego Unveiled. In this episode, I want to dig into the world of the ego and how it impacts our lives, specifically our spiritual lives. I want to uncover how it impacts what we say, what we think, and our behaviors, and how it also affects our goals in life. So I guess we'll start at the very beginning, understanding the concept of ego. So grab some coffee, tea, whatever you fancy, and let's settle in for what's bound to be an episode full of self-discovery. I'll be right back. Welcome back. I hope you're all situated and whatnot. Let's dive right in. All right. For me, I used to think ego was a horrible thing. For me, it was about being prideful and always boasting. And a lot of times I thought of it as a creator of obstacles in my path. Just always with that I can't mentality. It's too hard, or you're not equipped to do that. And it would basically break me down. And after a little bit of research, I started figuring out that it wasn't so much that it was trying to break me as much as it was trying to save me. My ego was literally trying to protect me from failure. But for a while, I agree. I used to think it was horrible, even so much so that me and a friend of mine, we named our egos. I decided mine was named Baruka. But I've been researching the topic that I had for today, and I found that ego is often misunderstood, and now I kind of have a better idea of what it is and why we need it, or why we don't need it, depending on how you look at it. It's not just about arrogance or self-centeredness. It's apparently an important concept of human psychology. Basically, our ego is our sense of self, our identity, and how we see ourselves in relation to the world. And when I said that it was my way, it was the ego's way of protecting me, I wasn't wrong. It's like our internal compass. Of course, not to be confused with our moral compass. It helps us navigate our surroundings. It helps us to make decisions and protects our self-esteem. It's a critical part of our psyche. It doesn't allow us to get hurt if it can stop it. Sometimes it does it in ways that we are angry about. Let's see, something as simple as, I want to go to college. Oh, you're not smart enough. And I hate that I would think about myself that way. But it was basically protecting me in case I did fail. So I'd like to explore some ideas I found regarding the ego, and we'll go into those throughout the episode. But let me give you a brief summary of them. Freud's ego theory, the 3 ego states. I'm going to look into the ID, the ego, and the superego, which are, of course, the 3 parts of Freud's ego theory. Ego and identity. How does our ego form our sense of self? What happens when it becomes overinflated or fragile? Third, I'd like to discuss ego and relationships. What effect does our ego have when we interact with others and form relationships with others? And most importantly, the difference of healthy versus unhealthy egos and how to achieve a balance and nurture a healthy ego. Sigmund Freud introduced a groundbreaking theory. He gave us an idea or a thought process to understand the mind and the human behavior. And at the center of this theory, he formed a model, kind of like a structure, so that we could understand the psyche. And it consists of 3 very integrated parts: the ID, the ego, and the superego. And his theory gives us insight into the forces that form our thoughts, emotions, and actions, and why we do it the way we do. So first I want to talk about the ID, which is basically a lot of instinct, a lot of just natural, unthought behavior. The idea is the most primitive and instinctual part of our human mind. It works off of the pleasure principle, let's say. It wants to gain a right now gratification of our natural wants and what we need. They are very rudimentary desires. Things like hunger or thirst and even sexual urges fall into that category. The idea operates without any regard for the social norms of society. And that's important. It doesn't care about moral standards or beliefs. It doesn't even care about the outcome of its actions. It works mostly in our subconscious, our unconscious realm, making it a very powerful force beneath our everyday awareness. It kind of reminds me a lot of our animalistic impulses. Animals, let's say, they have no sense of the standards set by the other animals around them or the ramifications of those actions. They just don't think about it. I suppose that in some ways this is the part of us that is by definition the most free and authentic part of ourselves. But of course we aren't animals, so there has to be more. Which brings me to the ego itself. Freud called it the rational mediator. It's the in-between. It's the distinguished contrast to the ID. The ego is our conscious, our rational and practical mind. It acts as a mediator between our impulsive demands of things like hunger and thirst of the ID and our external reality and what it's feeding us. This is the part that takes into account social standards and expectations. The ego operates in what it perceives as reality. It's pushing hard to satisfy the ID's desires, but it's trying to stay within the boundaries of our social norms and practicality. It wants to, I guess, appease everybody. It's responsible for our decision making and problem solving, and conforming to the demands of the outside world. So like I said, it wants to make everybody happy. The ego's main focus and task is to find a balance between the ID's immediate gratification needs and the restrictions of reality. And those restrictions come from our outside sources. This is the one we battle with the most. In childlike terms, our ID wants to act however it wants, wherever it wants, whenever it wants. But of course our ego says, no, we can't do that. It's not the right place, or it's not the right time, or that's not the way you're expected to do it. It's not the way you're expected to behave. It's not the way you're expected to think. So it kind of stops us and puts us back into check as far as what society sets for us. So that's our ego. But then there's the superego. That would be our moral compass. That superego, it represents all the acquisitions of social beliefs, our moral standards, and parental influences. It's basically everything we've learned from everything around us. It's the information we file away in our brains of how to think and act according to what we have been taught. It's everything we are intentionally taught and things we unintentionally pick up from our surroundings. There's certain things that nobody told you not to do. You just know that you're not supposed to do them. It develops over time as a person takes in and assigns to themselves these cultural and social norms. This part serves as our moral compass of the mind. It's an ingrained ethical standards and ideals on which the ego bases its decision-making process. When the ego's actions don't line up with the superego's moral judgment, it results in feelings of guilt, shame, or anxiety. Sound familiar? This is where sometimes we unintentionally impose on others or cause us to judge others unjustly because that's not what we were taught, and it's not what we're allowed to do because society doesn't let us. Hey, can anyone say shadow work over here? The quote about internal demons is, I guess it's not just a metaphor, I guess, because there are demons within us. One says, do it, who cares? The other says, society cares. And the last one says, shame on you, that isn't how you were raised or how you were taught. Freud's model of the mind, of course the ID, the ego, and the superego, continues to be a key concept in that field of psychology. It offers a way to understand the mechanics, the complex mechanics that determine how we behave and the development of our personalities and how we interact with others. While some aspects of his theories have been criticized and modified over time, that's not what I care about today, not the focus. For me, the relevance of his theory focuses on the importance of the interaction between our instinctual desires and behaviors, rational thoughts and ideas, and our social expectations, and moral conscious of the human psyche. His work continues to shape our understanding of the complexities of our mind, and it provides a huge insight into the depths of our behaviors. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, now let's figure out how all of that relates to spirituality. And spirituality, it's often seen as a journey. We're going on a journey to get a deeper connection, whether it be with our higher self, the divine, or whatever higher power the person believes in. It's an integral part of our existence, whether we believe in ourselves, God, goddess, or whatever. It's a very important part. However, the ego, with its built-in focus on me, and our individual identity and self-preservation, can impact and change our spiritual journey in the most profound way. Let's talk about some of the complex relationships between the ego and spirituality. Of course, emphasizing the need for balance and self-awareness, because we want to encourage a meaningful connection with the divine or the spiritual realm. The ego plays a number of roles in our spiritual endeavors. On one hand, it provides us with a sense of self-awareness and identity. That in itself is crucial so that we can reflect and grow. It gives us the freedom to differentiate ourselves from others and experience the world as an individual so that we can form our own opinions and our own belief system. However, the ego's self-centered nature can also give rise to obstacles to the very spiritual growth that we're trying to obtain. One of those obstacles is our attachment to the material world. And that's a tough one. The ego tends to anchor us to this material life and this material world, always focusing only on the pursuit of wealth, power, or physical pleasures. We're always trying to reach for the better job or the bigger home or the newest gaming system, maybe even the nicest or newest car. Whatever the case may be, this attachment, it throws our focus off completely in our spiritual pursuit. And then we have our self-centered desires. The ego really does a job on amplifying these desires, which of course lead to attachment. And when we lose the attachment, we just end up suffering. I hear that a lot of our suffering is our own doing. And when I think about the fact that, yes, being attached to things really is the root of my suffering, then wow, okay, puts things in a whole new perspective. But our spiritual path is often promotes detachment, letting go of things, whether it be parts of ourselves, anger, selfishness, or whether it be those physical things that we are so proud of, having that big house and we're so proud of it. That's an attachment to the pride, to the house. Detachment and selflessness can be at odds with the ego's desires. Basically, it comes down. Letting go and following a spiritual path is the exact opposite of what that ego wants. Let's look at judgment and pride. The ego can lead to the judgment of others and excessive pride. And some people say that it's okay to be prideful. To an extent. We start to judge others. How many times have you heard that the person that is judging us or condemning us is really only trying to make themselves look or feel better? The ego wants us to be what it considers successful or enlightened, for that matter. But all that judgy behavior and all that superiority complex, pride, it's only hindering our development of compassion and humility. Understandably so, probably the most revered aspects of many spiritual practices. Finding a balance between the ego and spirituality, I don't know, but to me, sometimes it really does seem unachievable. But if we take into account that when we know our enemy, we're more likely to win the battle. So if you know ego, you can beat ego. Self-awareness is the first step towards balancing the ego and spirituality. Self-awareness. It makes sense. Watching your words, your thoughts, and your actions. Pay mind to who you direct your emotions towards. Start by acknowledging the ego's presence and its tendencies without judging yourself. We're human, and fighting learned behaviors isn't always easy, but being at least mindful of them makes them easier to conquer. Being kind to yourself, noticing it, kind of like when we meditate and we notice a thought. We don't fight the thought, we just notice it. Speaking of meditations, mindfulness and meditation, practices like these, they can quiet that ego's constant chatter in our brains. These practices give us time to discern the thoughts, behaviors, and actions that are ego and which aren't. It gives us an opportunity to be kind to ourselves for the actions of our egos. Learning to love ourselves even in the midst of our ego struggles. When you feel broken because of an ego, sometimes maybe you failed at something and your ego's saying, "See, told you, you screwed it all up." And you feel crappy, but just being kind to yourself, doing some mindfulness and meditation helps you understand that. And the most wonderful part is that by quieting the ego's chatter in your head, you're finally able to connect with something deeper. We're the more spiritual part of ourselves and nurture that part of ourselves. Humility and surrender. Recognizing that the ego doesn't have to be an adversary to spirituality. This was a hard one for me to understand. Because on one hand, I thought spirituality was all about ascending higher and becoming enlightened and not being of this world. And ego on the other side, being prideful, being boastful, being self-centered, being all about me. How I couldn't understand how to make them fit together. But apparently there is not a time nor place to start to hate or despise a part of ourselves. This is not it. We need to learn to work with it and understand that it is crucial for us. We have to cultivate humility and surrender to a higher power or the divine force or even your higher self and allow it to guide your path. And you'll slowly notice how you can surrender and still love yourself in its entirety, including your ego. And let's talk about engaging in acts of compassion and service to others. Being that helpful person transcends that self-absorbed behavior and concerns and fosters a sense of interconnectedness with yourself, your higher self, your higher power, or the divine. And it does, in fact, enhance your spiritual growth. Compassion and service without a reward changes the focus from me, to others. And by focusing on others through your spiritual growth, you'll indeed fulfill the universe's divine mission. And of course, at the end of the day, balancing the ego and spirituality is going to be a continuous journey. While the ego often presents obstacles and challenges to our growth in our spiritual life, it also provides the self-awareness we need to embark on a meaningful quest. A quest for compassion, a quest for kindness, for oneness within the divine or higher self, recognizing the ego's tendencies, practicing mindfulness, practicing compassion, and nurturing humility. All these things are basically essential practices in harmonizing these two aspects of our existence, spirituality and ego. Interestingly enough, where I once thought that the ego was blocking my spiritual growth, in actuality, it was ultimately the ego that was serving as a bridge. It was connecting my needs and wants with a strong desire to achieve enlightenment in my spiritual life. And now that we understand how the ego is an integral part of our spiritual journey, I'd like to invite you to join me next week when I discuss how to achieve a realistic balance between the ego and spirituality. Let's learn how to apply it to our everyday normal life. Remember, understanding your ego is literally the first step towards self-discovery and personal development. I challenge you to keep exploring that intricate maze of your own ego, and that it might lead you to a deeper understanding of yourself and the world around you. Well, to the end of this episode, I suppose. I want to thank you for joining me this week. Please don't forget to subscribe there and share this podcast with your friends. Share it wherever you can. If you have any questions or comments, I strongly encourage you, drop them below there. Especially if you have any tips for next week's episode, tips on how to balance a life of ego and spirituality. I thoroughly would enjoy that. And as a reminder, you can find so much more information about me on my website, www.noemispiritualguide.com, or on Facebook at Noemi-Spiritual Guide. Until next week, please love yourself, be kind to yourself, and spread compassion all over the world.